I'm so thrilled to welcome you all here. My name is Catherine Reynolds Lewis. I'm the founder of the Institute for Independent Journalists, which is by and for freelancers of color with a goal of emotional and financial sustainability. And fellowships can be a really important way to have a sustainable journalism career as a freelancer. So I'm thrilled for the illustrious panel that we have today to discuss this issue and to share their wisdom and encouragement around fellowships. As our moderator, we have a very accomplished journalist, Alissa Figueroa, a Baltimore-based journalist and filmmaker, as well as a lecturer at Morgan State University. She is a 2002 Film Independent Fellow and a 2020 Knight-Wallace Reporting Fellow, which you'll hear come up again. Before coming to Morgan State, she ran the Ida B. Wells Fellowship for Investigative Journalists of Color at Type Investigations, which will also come up later in this conversation. So thanks again, everyone, for being here, and I'm turning it over to Alissa.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So I'm excited to see you all today. And just as Catherine mentioned, I know a lot of our panelists. Noy has the job that I used to have. I did a fellowship that was run by Lynette Clemetson, so I'm really excited to be running this with colleagues and people I've worked with in the past, and to talk about the importance of fellowships. I also, at Type Investigations, I worked with freelancers almost exclusively. So yeah, I think this is a great panel for independent journalists, and I'm excited. So what we'll do first is I will do a quick bio of everybody who we have on our panel today, and then we'll get right into questions. You should have more information, longer bios for each of our panelists that you have access to. So Noy Thrupkaew is the current director of the Ida B. Wells Fellowship Program and a reporting fellow as well at Type Investigations. She focuses on human rights and labor reporting, and she was a longtime independent journalist as well. Ashley Smart is joining us. He is an associate director of the Knight Science Journalism program at MIT and a senior editor at Undark magazine. Dean Baquet leads the local Investigative Times Fellowship that will launch in the coming months. And as you all know, he previously served as the executive editor for the New York Times from May 2014 until June 2022. And Lynette Clemetson is the director of the Wallace House Center for Journalists at the University of Michigan. She started her print career in the 1990s with Newsweek magazine based in Hong Kong and in Washington, D.C. before moving to the New York Times as national correspondent. And she's also worked in a variety of news outlets and mediums. So with those brief intros, I think we'll kick it right off and I'll hand it over to our panelists. I'm going to ask each of you to describe the structure of your fellowship and the goals for your fellowship program. So we'll just go one by one and I'll call on each of you. So why don't we start with Noy, because you're the first on my list.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alissa. It's wonderful to be part of this panel and to be speaking with all of you. I was a longtime freelance journalist before I had this job, so I feel like, it's like almost among family in a way. So lovely to meet you all. So I'm the director of the Ida B. Wells Fellowship at Type Investigations, and that was really created to try and do a little something to diversify investigative journalism by offering 1 year of fellowship of $25,000 to journalists of underserved backgrounds. So you get the $25,000 stipend, year-long mentoring from myself and another staff editor, and we help you basically put your investigative training skills into practice by doing your first long-form investigation. So we also pay for fellows to go to the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference. We pay for an online data boot camp. There's monthly trainings with editorial staff at Type and with guest speakers. And we also pay, travel expenses as well. And then once, your piece is ready to go, we also start pitching to public, to partner publications if you're a freelancer, but we also work with, staff editors, staff writers at other publications. So it's open both to staffers and to freelancers. And then we offer legal vetting and fact checking and communications assistance also to get your piece in front of the people who need to read it, to watch it, or to listen to it. So that's the structure of our program. And it's been such a pleasure to have this directorship job so far. And I'm really looking forward to more. Thanks so much.
When does the application cycle start for the next group?
So the applications we'll open up the cycle in mid-January or so of next year. And then we go through kind of a long process and, interviews and reference letters. And then we announce the fellows. We pick the fellows in May and we announce them in June.
So then the fellowship goes from June to June.
Actually, yes, it goes from June to June. That's correct. So that would be starting in June of next year and ending in June of 2024.
Thank you. Lynette, do you want to go next?
Sure. So the Wallace House Center for Journalists has the Knight-Wallace Fellowships Program, which is what we're talking about today. We're a residential academic year fellowship based at the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan academic year is a semester based, not quarters. So our academic year starts in the end of August and runs through April. Our application season is open now. I want to say this very clearly. If there are non-US citizens on the webinar who are thinking of applying, our deadline for international journalists is December 15th. So I want to say that right at the top. If there are any non-US citizens who are thinking of applying, and the reason we have that earlier is because of the time it takes now to get visas for international journalists to come to the university. Our deadline for US applicants is February 1st. We announce our fellows in May, and fellows are expected to come to Ann Arbor by the third week of August to start the academic year at the end of August. We provide a $75,000 stipend for the year, plus $5,000 right in the beginning to help with relocation expenses. And we find that that is sufficient to live and study in Ann Arbor for a year. We pay an auditor's tuition for our fellows to access courses at the university. And fellows do a number of things in our program. What we ask for, and I know we'll be diving into this, is to really think about a project that you need time and resources to complete. So we're an 8-month program, and we're looking for projects that are in depth, that you need several months and some help to execute. And we open the doors of the university to you, and you're able to audit courses. You're able to have full access to the library system and to researchers, which we find for independent journalists is one of the most important perks of the fellowship. And we're very cohort based. So we put a high priority on the small F fellowship and expect that at the end of our program, you will have learned as much from your fellows and the people in your cohort as you will from anything you've done independently at the university.
Can I ask one quick follow-up from you, Lynette? I know traditionally the residential fellowship required journalists to not work for a year, right? And then with my class and the class after, it changed, opened up to working journalists. How does that work now for the coming cohort?
Yeah, that's a great question. And even before the pandemic, Alissa, we were starting to be more flexible about what journalists, I think the notion of completely taking time off for the fellowship is an old notion. Newsrooms can't afford that, and independent journalists can't afford that. People need their careers to keep moving. And so when we say you have to step away from work, if you are a beat reporter who's covering Congress and you come to the fellowship, we expect to not hear from your editor asking you, to cover midterms while you're in the fellowship. So you have to step away from that sort of work. But increasingly, people apply with a long-term project that they're completing for an editor, even when they're in the residential program. And so it's just work that you need some dedicated time to complete.
Thank you. All right, Ashley, do you want to go next?
Sure. And a lot of this is going to sound like I'm copying off of you, Lynette, and in a way, in a way, I am, but our programs are very similar. So I'm the associate director of the Knight Science Journalism program at MIT, which is a residential fellowship for mid-career journalists who are doing science journalism. And we're set up in a very similar way. We're kind of designed to support journalists who are established in their career, but are maybe looking to pivot into a new direction or dig deep into some particular reporting topic, or spend time developing a new skill, and who would like to take 8 to 9, well, 9 to 10 months, I think, is the MIT academic year, to kind of step away from the deadlines and really immerse themselves in a project like this. I like to call it a sabbatical year for journalists. It's basically a time to kind of spend time thinking deeply and following following something that interests you, right? So we are based at MIT, and a big part of the fellowship is being part of this community in Cambridge. So every year we bring journalists to Cambridge. They take audit courses at MIT and at Harvard and at other universities in the Boston area, developing their own curriculum, taking at least one science class a semester. But as with the Wallace program, a big part of that community is the other fellows, right? So we bring in 10 fellows each year. Usually it's always a mix of US journalists and international journalists. Usually it's about 50-50, but a big part of the fellowship is really that exchange and relationship building with the other fellows. The fellows, in addition to taking classes, will do seminars together. We do a seminar series specifically for the fellows, workshops, and also other events that are kind of designed to foster this exchange. So I can speak as the associate director of the program, but I can also speak as a former fellow of the program. And I can attest that really, these relationships with the other fellows are a huge part of the experience that we really try to cultivate. We are accepting applications now. The deadline for applying to the Knight Science Journalism Fellowships is January 15th, 2023. That's for both international and domestic applicants. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that, and I'm open to talk more in detail if people have questions.
I guess one quick follow-up is, just to clarify, the project that applicants are pitching is a science reporting based project. Maybe that's too obvious to ask, but
Yeah. Yeah, so the projects we do ask that they be based in science journalism. They can take a variety of forms. Often fellows will come and basically spend a year exploring a book idea, and their project is basically to develop a proposal for a book. We've had fellows come in and want to learn more about AR and VR and how that can be used in reporting, right? And so for one fellow, their project was to build a VR experience, something that came out of kind of their year developing their skills in this area. Sometimes the project is to develop a series of magazine stories. So it can vary. And I should also add that we define science journalism very broadly. And so even if you don't consider yourself a science journalist, it's very possible that you may have been doing science journalism if you've been reporting on things like the environment or public health or social science, and the ways that any of these topics intersect with society or the political sphere or other spheres, right?
awesome. All right, Dean, I'll throw it to you.
So first off, thank you for having me. This is the perfect kind of program for me. First off, all of the panelists know a lot more about this subject than I do, creating and leading fellowship programs. And the audience is just the kind of audience I want to reach. So thank you. So ours is just starting. And the way it's going to work is, and has been working because we've been taking applicants, is reporters apply to do a specific investigative project. We will then select a set number of reporters who will remain in their cities or states where they are, with occasional visits to the New York newsroom, but largely work from there. The Times will pay them a full salary for the one-year program. We will publish their work in the New York Times and also in a local news organization as well. We're not aiming just at reporters who work for news organizations. We're also aiming at it's also for freelancers, because our goals are, I think we have two main goals. Number one is to produce the work, particularly in cities and states where the news organizations have frankly been gutted and can't take risks on long-term work, and can't take risks on investigative stories where you don't know the outcome. And secondly, to help diversify the ranks of investigative journalists, which, I started I started my professional life as an investigative reporter, and I still remember in the 1980s going to investigative reporters conferences and being one of only 2 or 3 people of color at the conferences. And while things have gotten better, they're still not completely there. So I want to make sure that some of the people who do this work will help diversify the industry. Our deadlines are rolling. We have applicants flowing in now, and we'll pick a first group probably by the end of the year. But you can also apply in February, March, because I don't think the calendar dictates the investigative story. We're looking for people in particular, we're looking for people who are not experienced investigative reporters, because the goal is to teach. So we're looking, for the beat reporter who's been on a beat for 3 or 4 years and has an idea, maybe even has some reporting in his or her notebook sitting in the back pocket, who would love to just sort of figure out a way to take a year and turn it into something larger. And I think that's it. For me, I will close by putting an emphasis on 2 words. Ours is nascent. It's really just starting. We have a lot to learn. I've been visiting newsrooms across the country and talking to editors across the country and reporters. And so ours is flexible too. We're learning that some of the original ways we designed it didn't actually work when we went out into the field and talked to people. So this is our first year, and it'll probably morph over time, but that's the goal. And it's specifically an investigative project.
Thank you. So I want to ask you one follow-up question, and I'll ask this to Noy as well, because I think it's very connected to how this works when it comes to freelancers. So the piece publishes in the New York Times, right? And you said, is it required that it also co-publish with a local paper or local outlet? And if so, if someone is a freelancer and not a staffer, are you imagining that they would pitch their piece to a local outlet as well? I'm just trying to wrap my head around how that would work for freelancers.
No, we would, yeah, I do. I think it's gotta co-publish in a local public. I mean, picture the scene, right? We pick a great local investigation. The work gets produced, and it's in a place where not a lot of people get the New York Times. There are not a lot of subscribers. So I think that sort of blows the effect that you want on the local community. So, I mean, we will do the work of making sure there's a publishing partner. I am not finding, by the way, any trouble in that regard. I mean, every place I've gone to, people have said, "Oh my God, of course we would publish it." So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And the selection will not be based on whether the person has a local journalism connection. Though most of the applicants so far do. It'll be based on the quality of the idea.
That's really helpful. And Noy, let me ask you a similar question, and then we'll move on to our next one for everybody, because I think it's very connected to how the actual thing works. For your fellowship, I know you also have require partners. How do you work with getting pieces placed and co-editing and stuff like that?
Yes, thank you, Alissa. So we work with both freelancers and staff reporters. So if someone's a staff reporter, then we ask for a letter of commitment from their employer that they are going to let the reporter work on their piece for a substantial amount of time during the year, and then they will publish or air the piece on their outlet. In terms of for freelancers, we help freelancers pitch the piece. So we discuss with our fellow, possible outlets. We have a whole pool of partners that we worked with over many years, ranging from the New York Times to High Country News, to a publication outside of Chicago called Cicero Independiente. So we do both local and national outlets and even international outlets as well. And so we, the fellow will write a pitch, we'll vet it, and we'll start sending it out to, partners that we think offer the best fit for the piece as it's conceived by us and the fellow, and, for impact as well. And then once we have somebody who's interested in the piece, then we make a first pass through the draft and make sure that the investigative findings are strong and well corroborated. And then we start working kind of in partnership with the publication to ensure that they're ultimately the people who are going to publish it. We just want to make sure that we've really cemented the investigative findings. And then, the story might change slightly. It might be written more to, that specific audience. It is ultimately going to be their piece that were published in partnership with us. And that has actually always been such an interesting and wonderful process. We've done work with radio outlets. I myself, I'm not intrinsically a radio journalist. So it's been amazing to hear how partners who work on different forms of media conceive of and conceptualize stories. And that's been a wonderful part of our learning and development as well as a fellowship program.
And I don't know if Lynette or Ashley, if you want to say anything about partner publishing relationships or anything like that as well, because I know that is something that matters to freelancers. If they don't have that established, if they're not a staffer where the work is guaranteed to publish in a specific place. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, I can jump in. We also help people think through where they might publish their work. And also, when we spend time going to journalism conferences over the summer, when we're doing recruiting, oftentimes we're not just recruiting a journalist, but an editor as well, to think about how to think about fellowships as a way of working with independent journalists who they may want a relationship with, and may not have a staff position for. I can give you a really specific example. We did a panel on this at ONA. There's actually a science writer. Our program's not specific to science journalism, but a science journalist, Nick St. Fleur, who used to be at the New York Times, and STAT, which focuses on health science and medicine, based out of Boston. The editor there supported an application to our fellowship with Nick, for Nick to create a new beat for STAT on the intersection of science, race, health, and medicine. And in the way it worked out was that we were in some ways helping STAT bring on a new staffer. And Nick was able to use the fellowship to create the beat. STAT was able to fundraise to bring him on full time. And it worked out really well. And sometimes it's the same with a magazine journalist who's trying to develop a longer relationship with a certain publication or some stability. And so I think we're pretty creative and flexible because we know the industry is in need of creativity right now.
Thank you. Ashley, do you want to add something?
Just a short note. I mean, basically, we kind of operate in a similar fashion in that we work with our fellows to kind of think through placements for the stories that they're working on. Although we don't have kind of a formal mechanism in place to kind of establish those partnerships. But we definitely try to be supportive of that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm. And then I know with Type, just because I used to work there, you also get the freelance, since the stipend is $25,000, not a full year of salary. you're allowed to work on other stories as well. You're not expected to work on this full time, you know, so you can survive. And then you also get paid the freelance fee by the partner organization. So if you pitch in New York Times Magazine and they pay you $2.50 a word, we say you have to pay that amount. You don't get this for free. You have to contribute, so that person also, the fellow, gets their regular freelance fee. So I'll just throw that in there because I know it. So what are you, we'll do another, everybody, what are you looking for in applicants and applications? Because I know some of these fellowships are much more about the story and making sure a story is feasible and doable. Some are much more about who the person is and a cohort. So let's go through that. We could do the same order. Noy, if you want to start.
Sure, thank you so much. So I saw there was a question in the chat about opportunities for early career journalists. So ours is open to early career journalists too. And there's no limit on the number of years that you've got under your belt. We just ask that you are a journalist from an underserved background, or you can tell us a little bit about how your presence and your story might help diversify investigative journalism. And, you know, we are open to journalists from any region. We do have a fellowship set aside for someone from one of 9 Southern states. That's our Southern I.W. Wells Fellow. And we ask that that fellow be living in, report from, and publish their work in an outlet and that they're based in North or South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Kentucky, Texas, or Mississippi, and the whole list is available on our website. But we do have that special regional focus for that one fellow. Otherwise, we're open to folks from everywhere. In terms of experience, yeah, just we really would like you to have some of your reporting chops. This is a one-year fellowship. We can't kind of take on people who have not had some degree of professional journalism experience. So we are open to people who are graduating from journalism graduate programs, and for people who are journalism internships as well. But I think it's maybe best geared towards people who have a few years under their belt, maybe have been a beat reporter and have gotten kind of this idea. I do feel like, you know, people from underserved backgrounds, we all have the potential to be investigative journalists. We've seen inequality, we've experienced systemic problems, and we can call it out. So this is basically a way of putting kind of the tools and techniques of investigative journalism to looking at systemic problems. Have I answered your question, Alissa? Is there anything I'm forgetting?
What makes it, well, no, I think that's good. Then we can do another round about what makes a successful application specifically. Maybe that's too much to cover in one question. But if you're a mid-career journalist, but you have never done investigative reporting, can you apply? Like, what if you've worked in news for 20 years, but you've only ever been a beat reporter? You're not an emerging journalist. Could you still apply?
Absolutely. We really do welcome that, because this is about helping people do their first intensive long form investigation. You know, you might have been a beat reporter for 20 years, but oftentimes people and journalists from diverse backgrounds aren't given the time or the training or the trust to really launch into investigative journalism. And this is our effort to provide some of that.
Thank you. Lynette, do you want to talk about what you're looking for in applicants?
Sure. So I've seen questions in the chat about mid-career. I think a lot of the residential programs at the universities have historically been positioned as mid-career. I've kind of stopped using that language, and we say accomplished journalist or experienced journalist, because I think mid-career is a very, you know, we want to view things in a very elastic way. I think most journalists who come to our fellowship have at least 6 years of experience, and many more than that. And sometimes people have decades of experience. And I think what I tell people is we're looking for people who feel that their best work is ahead of them, and who have ideas that have been unexplored. And so, you know, if your idea for what you want to do is authentic, and it's something that excites you, and it's something that will sustain your interest over the period of the fellowship, that's the most important thing for us. I think most of our fellows are in their 30s and 40s, but certainly not exclusively. We've had fellows who are in their 50s who have gone on from the fellowship to do amazing things. And so I just wrestle a little bit with the term mid-career and what that means. I think even among this group, Dean is starting a new phase of his career that's completely different. When I came to this directorship, I was making a shift in what I was doing. And so really it's about the enthusiasm that you're moving into what you're proposing with for us. I don't know if that's useful.
You made my day calling me mid-career.
Yes. I don't know, Ashley, is it the same? Is it the same for you?
It's very similar, and I think I'm going to steal your nomenclature and start calling it accomplished journalists as well. We have an eligibility requirement of having at least 3 full years of journalism experience, right? But the range of applicants that we get and the range of fellows we select, spans from that level of experience to, as Lynette was saying, people who have decades of experience, but are still coming in with kind of fresh, new, exciting, and interesting ideas that are going to fill what we think is some gap in the existing science journalism coverage that's out there. One other thing I didn't mention, I think someone asked about early career fellowships. KSJ, the Knight Science Journalism Program, partners with Stat Magazine, which is based here in Boston, to do a Sharon Begley health reporting fellowship. And so that's fairly new. It started just within the past couple of years, but that's geared specifically toward early career journalists who want to cover the health beat. And it's run in parallel with Stat. So basically they spend time reporting with Stat throughout the year, but they also spend time doing the seminars and the workshops with the KSJ fellows throughout the year, and also auditing courses at MIT and Harvard like the other fellows do. So that's a new program that might be of interest if you are in the early career, still to be accomplished stage in your career.
If I could just add something quickly to what Ashley said, because people are mentioning regional focus. One of the things that we've started doing more specific outreach on recently is journalists who are interested in starting new news ventures or projects in the Great Lakes and Midwest. I think that we have a great interest in trying to address the problem of news deserts and misinformation that's really pervasive in the middle of the country, and that in rebuilding, revitalizing journalism in this region, not just rebuilding the old systems and making sure we have an eye toward creating diversity in the models for new news organizations. And so we had just before the pandemic started actually launched something called the Midwest News Initiative, and it got stalled because of the pandemic and because we went remote, but we see a lot of interest in people not just coming with editorial ideas, but wanting to learn how to craft and launch independent news ventures. And so we have someone in this year's fellowship class who's doing a project called Pop-Up Docs. He's a visual journalist, and he's trying to create a mobile storytelling unit to teach visual and post-production skills to communities of color who may not feel that they have access into the typical on-ramps for journalism. And so that's an entrepreneurial idea. And being at a university, we've got a business school and a law school and a lot of resources, not just to help people with subject matter expertise, but with real business expertise. And so we're very open to those ideas as well.
Well, Dean, what about, I know you guys are just launching, but what are you looking for in applicants and applications?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty clear on what we're looking for. Specific investigative ideas, and for us, the idea rules. And by investigative, I mean something that reveals, something that reveals either impropriety by government, business, individuals, etc., companies, as I said. So the idea is gonna rule. You do not have to prove that you can nail it, but it's got to be more than I vaguely think my legislature is bad. It's got to be something more specific than that, a more specific idea. And I'm not worried about it being too local, frankly, because that's the goal. I'm not looking for national investigative stories. I'm looking to this is about producing stories that are not being produced because local news organizations have been cut so much. Somebody in the chat asked about will we accept New York applicants? The answer is yes. We've already gotten some good New York applicants. Though all things being equal, I'm looking more for investigative stories in places where there's no investigative capabilities. But I'm a sucker for a good idea. So we will follow the good idea. We're looking for people who, we're very flexible, but the ideal candidate maybe has been covering the beat 3 to 5 years, is not a beginning journalist, has some experience, not particularly, interested in people who've been investigative reporters for 25 years. They're doing the work. They don't need our help. They don't need, help learning how to do it. I have, by the way, have been invited into newsrooms to help them hone their pitches. I've done that. I've gone into newsrooms and I've met probably with a dozen reporters, in places all over the country who want help crafting an idea, because not everybody quite knows what an investigative idea looks like. And I'm happy to do that. It's actually been helpful to me because it's made me realize where there were holes in my own thinking. But that's what we're looking for. And again, the idea will rule. I mean, the idea, the choice will be made on who's got the best idea, and we're willing to take risks. We're not expecting somebody to come to us. Here's my 25-page memo that lays out everything we have. My response to that is, well, you don't need us. I have evidence. I've looked at some lawsuits. I've done some FOIA requests, and I believe this thing can be X, and I actually need help shaping it because we want to help with the editing. And that to me is the ideal applicant.
Thank you. And I think that brings us actually to Noy to talk a little bit, because you're the other fellowship here that's very focused on the idea and the story. Not that the other two aren't, but I know the residential fellowships have the goal is also to, help. It's about the cohort. I know for IW Wells, the cohort element is a part of it, but a big part of it is delivering this hopefully big, impactful story that will change somebody's career trajectory. So can you talk a little bit about what you're looking for in the idea? How much research should be done? Are there specific things that are very, very important that you're looking at?
Yeah, thanks so much, Alissa. There's so much of what Dean says that I would echo. We're really looking for a piece that looks at systemic problems and accountability issues, has a good public interest angle. And the way you can start thinking about this is by asking yourself some good, strong, basic questions, like who is being harmed by this particular problem? Who is doing the harming? Who is committing the harm? And how is that harm being committed, right? So we're really interested in looking at institutions and systems. And of course, we need to have strong characters and strong people to kind of center a story around. But this isn't about necessarily a one-off crime. It's about maybe a pattern of police misconduct or a system of corruption that's happening inside of a certain area. We are not, as locally based as the projects that the program that Dean is describing. We work with freelancers, so we found that sometimes having a national angle on a local story can increase the number of potential partners and publication outlets. So we do look for a little bit of a national consideration if you have a local story at work there. In terms of how much preparation and inquiry you should do for developing your story idea, I mean, I think a lot of great investigative ideas come out of beat reporting. If you're an education reporter, you cover crime, that you'll start to observe the ways that your local government or a certain system may impact individuals. And so I think it does help if you've done, some degree of reporting to kind of flesh out your proposal. We really look for originality. Is this something that will advance the conversation? It can be a story that has been written about before, but maybe not a deep dive, not something that's really getting to the meat or the root of a problem. So we do want to kind of expand upon pre-existing reporting in a new and impactful way. So there's no untrammeled ground in journalism, but there are new interesting angles and ways of thinking about systemic problems that I think can be very, very strong and impactful for journalists. So I think there is some pre-reporting that does need to be done. I would do an originality search, look out there and see what's been written on your story of interest. And we do ask that it is a story and not a topic, right? That it is trying to answer a specific investigative question about like what harm is being committed and who might be doing that. How does this structure of inequality work in this particular story that you're interested in? And we also try and get this piece out in a year or so. So we ask that you have a mind towards feasibility. If you want to do a national security story, but you've never cultivated national security sources, that might not be the story that you come to us with, right? So we want you to have some fluency, some expertise, some knowledge of the topic or the sourcing already, and have a good idea where you might be looking. What rocks do you want to pick up and look under? What FOIAs might you want to send? Who do you think you should talk to? Because yes, we do ask that you come to us with a really good, strong proposal that we will help you refine, absolutely, but it's too much to kind of, if you have a great big idea that's like, it's not Moby Dick, we want like a piece that's like maybe 5,000 words or so. So the more focused that you can be, the better, I think. And I would say like reading the applications over the course of many years, that's often an issue that people have, like just this broad curiosity about some issue, but we really want to find a targeted story. You just got to find that Achilles heel, right? You got to find the point that you can make an impact, and you need to try and tell that story within a year.
That's a really good answer. Thank you. And good advice in general. Good advice from you with my journalism students. So I know we're supposed to go into Q&A now. Maybe I can ask one question that I think Noy kind of answered, and then move into the specific Q&As, which is things that people should be careful to avoid. Because I feel like Noy was going there, right? We don't want to see a huge topic that's like, I'm going to take down the FBI, whatever, right? Do any of you have advice? Like, this is what I see a lot that is not great in applications for your specific fellowships, and not whoever has something that they'd want to share. I don't know if Lynette, Ashley, Dean, yeah, go ahead.
I think first of all, I think Noy hit the nail on the head. The ones that I have been seeing so far that I want to sort of send back are too big, and sometimes not fully developed. I mean, you gotta have something. You can't just say I think there's racial inequality in my city. You gotta have like my only other piece of advice, and I think that Ashley's advice is gonna be different because his program is very different. Is while you should be really ambitious, you should know what the fellowship is about, right? You shouldn't. I mean, if you're pitching to the New York Times local investigative fellowship, you really should think through Is this the right fellowship for me? Is my idea investigative, or is my idea a great feature story that's not investigative? So I think you got to understand what the project is about. What Ashley said wisely when we were practicing is, and he's right. In his realm, science is a big subject, and you may not think your idea is a science idea, and it may be. But I would still argue, read what the fellowship is about before you pitch.
I can
Go ahead,
I can
Ashley.
figure. No, I think maybe I should walk back what I said earlier, because I think your advice, Dean, is great even for our fellowship. I think maybe the one difference, or one of the differences, is that our fellowship is really designed to almost be kind of a choose your adventure for the fellow. So there's a lot more leeway to kind of shape the fellowship into what you want it to be. One thing I would say about applying for the fellowship that's also maybe kind of unique to KSJ, or a fellowship like KSJ's, and this isn't so much a warning about what not to do, but maybe advice on something that can be good to do, is to do your homework and decide how you plan to take advantage of the specific resources that are here in Cambridge. Looking into professors at MIT or at Harvard that you think would be good to work with and that are going to help to further this reporting project of yours. Looking at other institutions in the New England area that you can plan to kind of take advantage of. That shows us that you've really thought through both your project idea and how the specific resources that we have here can be helpful to you.
I would echo what Ashley just said, that people often ask, is it okay if I apply to more than one fellowship? And I always say, yes, of course. I mean, with the university-based programs, it's not at all unusual that someone will apply to the MIT fellowship and the Knight-Wallace, or to Harvard and to Stanford, or to all four of them. But I think it's important that if you have a project you want to pursue and you're applying at several different places, to still take the time to have each application reflect what is unique to that institution you're applying to, and what you would pursue that is particular to each place. Do some research on departments, do some research on professors. Almost every year, I get an application where somebody says they want to take courses in the journalism school at the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan doesn't have a school of journalism. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that disqualifies you, but I know that person maybe needed to spend a little bit more time looking at what we have. And then also, if you're going to apply to several places, read through every application letter before you hit send, because also every year I get something where one part of it says, I'd like to study in the Graham Sustainability Institute at the University of Michigan. And then later, and at the end of there, that's why I think Harvard would be a great place for me. Like it happens every year. And so just make sure you're doing your proofreading. And the only thing, I think we are also choose your own adventure, and fellows fall into different categories for what they're pursuing. The only thing that I tend to caution people that we're not is we are not the best fellowship if you're looking for a book fellowship. Not if you want to research a book. Fellows come to our program to research a topic that they expect to lead to a book all the time. But if you've gotten a book deal and what you really need is some money and a quiet room to sit and write, we're not that program. And there are other fellowships that are good for that, but that's not the Knight-Wallace Fellowship.
Thank you. These are really good answers. So I'll move on to the Q&A here. So I'll start with ones that are kind of simple first, easy to answer. What are the deliverables expected at the end of each fellowship? So I'll just go through my line. Noy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So at the end of our fellowship, we basically ask that you have a substantive investigation in hand. So that's, a 5,000 word reported piece, or it can be kind of some smaller pieces. As we're exploring with one of our fellows now, a 20 to 30 minute radio piece, but just something that's pretty hefty and has significant, well-vetted and corroborated investigative findings. And then, of course, that you feel like you've kind of learned more about investigative journalism. We ultimately would hope that you would continue on in that in some way and use the skills that you've learned through our fellowship, through attending the IRE conference, from our trainings and from working with your fellows to cultivate these skills and carry them forward.
And if the piece hasn't been finished and published at the end of the year, what happens?
It's okay. We just keep working. We understand that there are always little tricks and turns to reporting that you might not anticipate. So we will keep working with you to kind of get that piece out into the world. Sometimes it takes a little while to find a partner, a publishing partner. So that's why I think there was a question before about video and radio. Our expertise is not really significantly in video and radio. So if people do come with a proposal that involves those forms of media, we do think it's better if they have a partner already present for that, if they're a staffer or they already have a commitment, because I think we're not as deep in terms of that kind of reporting.
Lynette, what about you? Deliverables at the end of the fellowship?
So, and Alissa, I'm going to use you as an example
Oh,
of this. So my
fellowship never ended.
We don't have a hard deliverable for April, for the end of April. And that doesn't mean that we're not expecting people to work toward the conclusion of a project. But for a fellowship like ours, I often tell journalists that the results of their fellowship year often take 1 to 3 years to manifest. Alissa, you came to the fellowship working on a film project on police reform in Baltimore after 5 years after the death of Freddie Gray. And that was the project, and it was specific. You had a lane that you were in. You knew what you wanted to produce, but hadn't really started the work. And I think our goal is getting people to the best end product and having the end be natural. If we had made you turn in something by April, you wouldn't have. I mean, you're about to have a full length feature film, and that will have taken 3 years. But you couldn't have done it without that 8.5 month runway that the fellowship gave you. And so we're more focused on the long-term results for someone's career and than a specific output at the end of the fellowship. I don't know. So you should tell me, Alissa, whether I answered that well based on, because I think it's hard for programs like ours, because journalists come in and they're very deadline driven. And when I tell them, you don't necessarily have to have something in April, people freak out and they think, that if they don't show me something every month, that I think they're a slacker and that they're, not using the fellowship right, or that they're failing at the fellowship. So like inevitably people will come in January and say, I don't know, I think I'm doing the fellowship wrong. I'm not, because we're very deliverable focused. And I think part of our philosophy, and I think the same is true at MIT, is to shake people up by pulling them back from being deliverable focused in this one instance, to let them really challenge themselves. And I think when you started, you didn't think you were going to end up with a full film.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about my experience, because it's kind of interesting. I was working at Type running this fellowship, but I also had a part of my job that was also supposed to be helping us do more broadcast pieces, because I have a television documentary background. That's why they hired me. So I got this the fellowship changed at Knight-Wallace for 2020 because of COVID, and it became external. It was a reporting fellowship. So you could pitch stories in your community and do them remotely. And I thought that was an interesting idea to do a short mini digital doc, 15-20 minute piece about, you know, what happens 5 years after one of these mass uprisings. Does anything change? You know, is there significant reform? Where does reform fail the community? And Baltimore is an interesting place to look at that. And I ended up landing on a different part of the puzzle than I thought I would going in, and doing a lot of filming right away. And I used the funding from the fellowship to support the production. So to hire my crew and an editor and all of that. And essentially when the fellowship ended, I had just come to a different place where I decided I wanted to pursue this. And I ended up leaving my job, which was not the goal or idea at all until the very end of the fellowship. And I got a teaching position at a university here, for first journalist in residence job that allowed me to continue doing the film and raise more money. And now a full-time job after that first year of being part-time. And I'm still doing the film, and I've raised now another, you know, $200,000 and have a producer, and we have now potential distribution, and you know, it's become a real film, like a 90-minute feature film that goes to film festivals, which I never would have imagined that I would make in my life. So it definitely changed the trajectory of my whole career, which I didn't expect going in. So I don't know if that happens to other people, but yeah. So in terms of deliverables, yeah, that's an unusual deliverable. I don't know. It comes someday. Ashley, do you want to talk? Answer that question?
Absolutely everything Lynette just said is exactly the same, I would say, for KSJ. The one thing I would add, and this is maybe kind of speaks to your experience too, Alissa, is that oftentimes fellows will come in with one idea of what their project is going to be, and it kind of takes a new direction while they're here, and that's perfectly fine. That's something that I think a lot of people stress about, but you know, that's a very normal thing to happen. And while the fellows are here, we have these kind of roundtable discussions, and the director and I meet with fellows to kind of help guide these projects in the way that they want to go. And sometimes it surprises all of us, right? But
I think you're muted.
Sound dropped.
lost my.
There you are.
Now you're good.
Yeah. We don't have a hard deliverable, but we do have a showcase at the end of the year where all of the fellows give like a 30-minute presentation on their project, and we invite other members of the MIT community in. So this is just kind of a fun chance to show off all the interesting and exciting stuff that they've done over the year. Fellows stress about it. They really shouldn't, because it's, you know, it's more fun than anything. But that is kind of the one thing that we ask for fellows to do at the end of the year in May.
Dean, do you want to answer deliverables?
Yeah, ours is pretty clear, which is a story or stories. It does not have to be one 3,000-word story. The investigation will dictate the form of the story. It can be running smaller stories, one big story, two big stories. And just to echo something others have said, we do not expect your idea to look the way it looked in the pitch. I've never, as a reporter or as an editor, landed an investigation that looked exactly like the memo that started it. On the other hand, every time I've had a good memo or a good specific idea, a story has come of it, even if it looked different. So we will help you. What we are offering is the Times, me specifically, and Chris Davis, who I hired as my deputy from Gannett, and Sona Patel, who works with me, and other editors we will have will actually edit and help you shape the story. So we're not going to say, shake your hand and send you out into the world. We understand that our applicants will not have done this a lot, and we want to help them. We want to talk to them. We want to edit them. We want to talk to them every week. We want to visit them or wherever they are. We want to bring them to New York occasionally. So we will help guide the story and publish it and pay your salary.
So another very specific one here. Are fellowship opportunities paid to fellows as independent contractors or employees For example, will the New York Times give a fellow a 1099, or are they going to be on the New York Times payroll?
They'll
So
be on,
specifically for freelancers.
they'll be, whoever gets a fellowship, whether they're a freelancer or work for, fill in the blank publication, will be a New York Times employee for that period of time.
What about other folks? I don't know if this was specific. They mentioned New York Times, but I don't know if other people want to talk about that or put it in the chat. I don't know how folks are considered independent contractors or employees.
For us, they're independent contractors.
I think the same is true with Knight-Wallace, right?
Yes, and I think at universities, these stipends are more like, for tax purposes, more like getting a scholarship. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. And one thing, I mean, becomes important if you become a fellow, but our fellows don't get a 1099. And so they kind of have to proactively report their income. So we always recommend that, they kind of be prepared for the tax implications of their fellowship early on so that they aren't surprised.
Great. So I'm just trying to look for questions that are really different from things that we've covered.
Alissa, while you're looking, can I just raise something that strikes me as, so there are two categories here that Noy and Dean have this very story-driven fellowship, and Ashley and I have this more university-based, academic, research-based fellowship. But I think that the thing in common between these and why I would encourage people in general to think about fellowships is sitting in the position that I sit in, and over the years, and having been a fellow myself, one of the things that I have seen change in the industry so much is that the lack of career support for journalists, whether you're somebody who's been moving through staff jobs or you're an independent journalist, that people are really looking for support and direction and a way to think sustainably about how to remain a journalist, because it is really, really hard to do right now. And I'm sure a lot of the people in participating today are people who are, have wrestled with periods in their career where they thought, can I keep doing this? Is my finances are so precarious, the jobs are so few and far between. Is it time for me to think about doing something else? And when we are most successful, I feel like we've finished the year and I know very concretely that I have helped keep people in journalism, and that's the benefit of the fellowship. And that, I for programs like ours at universities, Ashley mentioned that he and the director meet with fellows. I think that's a really important part of the fellowship. I spent all morning meeting with fellows, and there's like, people ask me sometimes, am I a faculty? Am I a professor? And I said, well, no, I'm staff. Like, my job is some sort of a mix between, a career counselor, a priest, a rabbi, and a cruise ship director. Like, it's like a little bit of everything to keep people moving forward in their careers, and that we create a lot of room for people come in. I think, the people who apply to our program are very ambitious about their careers, and they start with this great idea. But what we try to create in the fellowship is a kind of a safe community where people can also talk about all of the things where they feel vulnerabilities in their career, the difficulty in balancing the ambition of their career with their family life, with, all of the various kind of difficulties that that people experience, and we create a space where people can step back and sort of holistically take care of themselves for the time that they're with us. And so I just wanted to say that, because I think people sometimes worry that if they express that need for wellness or care, that they may not be regarded as serious or as ambitious enough. And I think that our programs all understand that people need support, and that's why we're here.
The one thing I think that's is not as usual from you, Lynette, wise. The one thing I'll say that I suspect Noy will agree with is, I think yes, we will at different levels, each of our groups will offer financial support. But I think the main thing we will offer, our Noy's and everybody's to some degree, is some expertise, is to really, I mean, my group will line edit the stories and put them in shape so that I'm comfortable publishing it not only in the Times, but someplace else, which means a lot of front end editing, because we also understand that the people we're embracing for this program are not people who've, if Bob Woodward applies, I'm not sure we will take him, unless the story is really good. But we're looking for people who want to pick up the phone every couple of days and say, I got this thing, help me figure it out. And that the one, it's for another webinar about the editing crisis. But when I visited newsrooms to talk to them about the program, I mean, their editors were like thrilled that I made time to talk to them about stories and coverage, because their editors don't have time. And in some ways, we're offering the most valuable thing we're offering, in addition to a paycheck, is the time, is to make sure that when you want to talk through the story, we will hop on a plane and be with you. When the draft lands, we will put you through the torture that I've spent my life being put through. And that we will end up with something that we're all proud of.
Thank you, both of you. Those. Thank you for adding. These are on my list of questions. So good impromptu addition. So there's one question here. I know we're short on time. This one is less specific, because I think we have a lot of very specific ones that can be maybe answered better if people look at websites and stuff. But this person says, I've been granted a few reporting fellowships in my career, but the last reporting gig didn't end well. I could not get the stories published. That definitely hit my confidence. Any tips on finding my self-confidence and trust of fellowship committees to apply again? And this is something I've seen happen with freelancers, like it can be, you do all this work and then it just doesn't go anywhere. So I don't know. I think it's a good thing for folks running these fellowships to be thinking about. I don't know if anyone here has any responses for that applicant.
I mean, sometimes, if I can jump in, from my own experience as a reporter and editing investigative stories, sometimes investigative stories don't land, and you just got to own up to that. But I have, in my experience, if you and your editor are in constant communication, and you understand that stories change, you almost always come up with a story. I used to go into stories when I was running investigations specifically, and not just the paper, and I would go in with a minimum goal and a maximum goal. My maximum goal is I'm going to fill in the blank. My minimum goal is I'm going to end up with a hard-hitting explanatory story that explains an important problem. And I think if you go in with that kind of ambition and flexibility, and you have a good idea, I gotta say, 90% of the time the thing gets published. It may not look the way you expected it to, but 90% of the time the thing gets published. But I get the fear, and you should know that a good editor who understands that fear also will understand that we'll have the same fear, And we'll also understand that it might not land the way you planned. That's all I would add.
I so appreciate that question as someone who has written many grant, proposals and fellowship proposals. I know that's labor. I know how disappointing it can feel if you don't get that fellowship or if the reporting doesn't quite pan out as you expected. Again, it is the framework that Dean uses is one that we also use. What's your minimum hope or your minimum ambition for your story, and what's your maximum? And we'll try to get you as close to that maximum as possible. And we understand that that doesn't always pan out and things don't actually come out the way you expected. But just in terms of applying to fellowships, I mean, you've met us all here. We're all just regular people. And I think it's writing a fellowship proposal is a way of asking, regardless of which of the programs you might apply to, more open-ended, exploratory, deeply supportive ones, like in the academic environments like those of Lynette or Ashley, or more kind of focused and deliverable-driven ones like Dean and I are doing. Is like, this is an opportunity for you to ask that question that Mary Oliver asked, is what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What do you think is important for your journalism career, for where you are now? What story speaks to you? This is an opportunity to declare to us what you think is important. And if we don't accept that proposal, I literally have had a proposal turned down by the organization that I work for, Type Investigations. I didn't work for them when I wrote this proposal, but I just turned around and took it to somebody else and wrote a big story out of it when they accepted it. So if we're not the ones for you and you're not the ones for us, there is someone else out there for you. So I hope that you don't stay discouraged. And I hope that, like, once you have had a time to, grieve and feel what you're feeling, that you'll try again, because I think we would absolutely support your effort to do that.
And for ours, by the way, because it's a rolling fellowship, you might not get it the first group, but you might get it to the second group. And in fact, me or one of my colleagues may call you between groups and say, hey, you have a really good idea, but here's what you need to do, and take another shot at it.
We've definitely had people apply for our program once and not get it, and they came back again. And I was like, I am so glad you came back and you worked so hard, and they've gotten it again. So we really, really welcome that.
I think with every class at Type that I was there was at least one person who had applied previously, and sometimes people had applied 2 or 3 times and then they get it. And so anyway, I'll throw it to Catherine. Oh, go ahead. I just know we have to wrap up. So Catherine, do you want to take us out?
Yes, I couldn't have planned this better. I feel like all of you raised so many important issues that are some of the things we're trying to solve here at the IIJ, whether it's the sustainability of journalists and our own morale, or how to learn to report something significant. So I'm feeling very inspired. I want to apply for each of these fellowships. Ashley, will you take me back again at MIT? But I definitely encourage everyone to apply. If you think that you might be qualified, reach out. I found fellowship directors so accessible. They have Q&As, they have videos on their websites. You can really learn what they're looking for. And another thing I'm hearing is the need for feedback and sort of sharing. So I would encourage folks to just connect with the IIJ, to try to connect with each other, and maybe form small, application review groups where you can give each other feedback and share tips on what worked, because that really was crucial for me in winning some of the fellowships I've had. So thank you all so much for being here. Ashley Smart, Dean Baquet, Lynette Clemetson, Noy Thrupkaew, and especially Alissa Figueroa. We had like 32 questions come in, and you really fielded them all. So I'm definitely gonna see if we can send some follow-up resources and answer some of those outstanding questions. Please join the IIJ after a restorative, I hope, and relaxing holiday season, because no matter what's happening in journalism, we all find a way to get through it. And then on January 20th, we're going to have a webinar on book publishing, and February 13th on trauma-informed journalism, leading up to our conference on March 9th or 10th. So please make sure you're signed up for the IIJ newsletter so you hear about these events. And thank you again, everyone, especially our panelists, for sharing so much time and wisdom and encouragement that is needed now really more than ever in the 25 years that I've been in journalism. So thank you all so much, and hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.